Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to 13 things from the 80s that kids today just won't understand. Now, the 80s, it doesn't even sound that long ago to me, but we're talking 40 years. It's actually wild. Like, I was born in the 90s, so very, very close. So the life that I lived as a kid can't be too dissimilar to what kids lived in the 80s. I remember I had a cassette player, for like a year, and then I got a CD player instead. I'm sure cassette players were super popular in the 80s, but there's a lot that I didn't experience that, a lot of you guys who lived in the 80s would have. And it's going to be fun just to see how different life is now for youngsters compared to that in the 80s. Probably was a lot simpler back then. No internet, no social media. Kids were outside way more. A lot more socializing, I think. Like, in a lot of ways, society has obviously improved, but I think there's certain things from the past we should try and bring back.
The 1980s was an amazing time to grow up. The changes taking place in just about every aspect of life could be felt by everyone. Technology was the biggest driver of this, and life seemed like it couldn't get any better. The 1980s were a good mix of a latchkey past and the digital future that was to come. But things today are far different from what we ever imagined.
Wow,
so let's take a look at 13 things from
the McDonald's is just so different now, isn't it? You don't really see the clown anymore, Ronald McDonald. They've kind of phased him out.
The 1980s that kids today would never fully understand. The use of technology in schools varies greatly when we think back to the 1980s. They of course had overhead projectors, which allowed the teacher to project transparent sheets onto a screen, which allowed them to work through problems or worksheets as a whole class, essentially replacing the need for a blackboard. But when we think of classroom technology today, kids have iPads and laptops that they carry around with them all the time. Back in the 1980s, you were lucky if there was one giant computer somewhere in the classroom, or a special computer room you would go to that was used by the whole school. The days you could play on the computer was always a treat because it meant you could play the Oregon Trail. For some, this was the first memory of using a computer, and it certainly was memorable, especially since you were usually killed off before you made it to Oregon.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, today, every classroom has like a big interactive whiteboard. As you said, iPads and everything. I remember when I was in school, I had a book that we'd have to write essays and stuff like that. Now, kids probably don't even have to write anymore, do they? They can just type it on their iPad.
Kids today have access to more entertainment than they could ever dream of consuming. When new movies come out, you can stream them instantly, and you don't even have to beg your parents. In the 1980s, the closest thing to on-demand was waiting all week to head to the video store. This was after you waited months for the movie to be released on VHS. Then when you would head over to the new release section at your local video store, there's a good chance all the copies were already rented, and you had to wait even longer. There was still nothing better than making that weekly trip to rent movies and leaving with a stack of VHS tapes that would fill your weekend. Oh yeah, and you also had to remember to rewind the movies before you return them to the store.
Wow. So what happened if you don't rewind the movie? Because all the person would need to do, the next borrower, is they would need to rewind it. I suppose it's like a common courtesy, isn't it? Just so that the person doesn't have to rewind it themselves. Such a cool little quirk. Whereas now, who needs to rewind a movie anymore? It's not a thing anymore.
Rediscover your past by digitizing your family's memories with Legacy Box. Watch until the end of this video to find out more about preserving your legacy, and then visit legacybox.com/recollection. Within the last few years, the need for fidget toys has become almost a necessity for kids, as if sitting still for a bit is torture. Kids today have to constantly be fiddling, spinning, or clicking buttons in order to survive the day.
Crazy, right? They need to be stimulated in some way just to hold their attention.
The closest thing we had to a fidget spinner was the Rubik's Cube. This puzzle game had you twisting blocks in order to complete each side's color. It required thought and strategy to even come close, but there was also a book you could buy which helped you learn how to solve the puzzle. Aside from the Rubik's Cube, there were also these helicopter seeds that would fall from the trees. I guess picking them up, tossing them in the air, and watching them twirl back down to earth over and over again could be considered fidgeting back in the day.
Wow.
Whenever a disaster strikes today, you seem to always see a GoFundMe page.
Wow, look at all the famous, like Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder. Obviously, we know who that is. Who else do we have here? Is that Lionel Richie? I'm trying to see who else we have here. Is that Michael Jackson's brother? There's like a resemblance there. Lots of famous people. Robin Williams?
Or some other crowdfunding app that is meant to ease the financial burden. But in the 1980s, music was how we raised money for the needy. Songs like Do They Know It's Christmas and We Are the World gathered the decade's biggest stars to perform a charity single that raised money to combat the famine happening in Ethiopia. On top of that, there were also opportunities through television commercials.
That's Sting, isn't it?
To sponsor children in impoverished countries. For just $11 a month, you believed you were making a difference in the world. The fantasy genre in the 1980s was drastically different than what we see today. With CGI and advances in special effects, franchises like Harry Potter, Avatar, and Game of Thrones look unbelievably real. Maybe that's why cosplay is so popular even for adults. But in the 1980s, you never saw anyone walking around as their favorite character from The Dark Crystal or The Never-Ending Story. These movies used puppets and animatronics that were pretty crude, so you never truly felt immersed in that world. There was Star Wars, which was the most convincing, but it's really nothing like the newer Star Wars films developed today. Instead, we had David Bowie, basically dressed as a 1970s version of himself in the 1986 movie Labyrinth.
Could you imagine bringing someone from the 80s and taking them to like an IMAX and letting them watch like the new Dune movie? They would just be like... It would be like... They would be shell-shocked.
The 1980s was a revolution in video games being brought to the masses. This is the decade when kids moved away from heading to the arcade and chose to stay home and play their very own Atari, Commodore 64, or Nintendo Entertainment System. It was exhilarating when you opened up that birthday or Christmas present and saw a Nintendo logo, and kids today may never know that feeling. However, video games were large cartridges, and they occasionally needed special treatment before they could be played. Nintendo games like Duck Hunt and The Legend of Zelda may have needed the dust blown out before you could get it to load. If that didn't work, you might also have to try inserting the cartridge in different ways to get it to start. Today, games live online, and video game consoles are just computers that connect to the internet, and they give you instant access to any game you want to play. Oh yeah, and the controllers are wireless now, so you don't have to sit within 6 feet of the television to play a game.
Yeah, I remember my first games console, the PlayStation 1, and no, I think I had a Mega Drive. They were so big, the games cartridges, they were huge. You know, you'd have to like blow in them to get the dust out. Oh man.
During the 1980s, rainbows were not a statement about your sexuality. It was just a colorful way to accessorize an outfit. Who didn't wear the standard 1980s flip-flops with rainbow straps? There were also the occasional set of suspenders or a belt that added a pop of color to any toddler outfit. We also had Punky Brewster, Rainbow Bright, and even Reading Rainbow, which pretty much every kid in the 1980s grew up watching. Today, the world of music is large, and kids have endless options when it comes to finding their favorite musician, from rap to country, Disney Channel pop stars to YouTubers. But in the 1980s, there were really just two megastars in the world of music, Michael Jackson and Madonna. For Michael Jackson, it was his Thriller album from 1982, which became the best-selling album of all time. For Madonna, it was her Like a Virgin album in 1984, which had just enough bad girl edge to it that teenagers went crazy for it. Both artists built careers off the success they had in the 1980s, and they remain icons to this day.
Yeah, honestly, is Michael Jackson the sort of biggest musician ever in terms of, iconic status. I'm trying to think who else is on Michael Jackson's level, like at his peak. I mean, at the moment, the only one that's close is probably Taylor Swift. Like, she is huge. Like, but is she as big as Michael Jackson was at his peak? Getting close, probably getting close, you'd have to say.
The fast food experience in the 1980s was all about the promotions. I mean, who didn't have a set of Smurf glasses in their kitchen cupboard? Not only was the food affordable back then, but you got a ton of free stuff too. From 3D glasses and toys to California raisins and Muppet Babies, McDonald's, Burger King, and Hardee's were always offering up the coolest promo to get you in the door. Even Pizza Hut had promotional drinkware with the release of E.T. in 1982. And who could forget the Noid figures you could pick up at Domino's in the 1980s? Today, the influence that movies and pop culture have on fast food choices is pretty non-existent. And on top of that, inflation is about the only thing on the menu these days.
You're not wrong. Honestly, everything is just so expensive now. Like, the price difference between like now and just a couple years ago for certain things is almost like double. It's just, yeah, inflation is just going crazy.
Just like with movies and video games, streaming services give viewers control when it comes to watching their favorite show. But during the 80s, TV shows were a weekly event that aired on a specific channel at a specific time. So if you missed it, you were out of luck. That's why it was so important to consult the TV guide or the listings available in the newspaper if you wanted to watch something. Most people had a favorite night for watching TV, and that led to networks blocking their most popular shows into one night. NBC's must-see TV, although it wouldn't be called that until the 1990s, was Thursday nights, anchored by The Cosby Show. And TGIF became ABC's Big Friday Night, with shows like Full House and
Is that one of the Olsen twins? Is it?
Perfect Strangers. If you didn't have a VCR set to record your favorite shows, then you were at the mercy of catching reruns, which might mean months of waiting.
Wow. You know, whereas now, whatever you want to watch, you can have it within seconds. Like, there's no... Unless you're watching a series like Game of Thrones that's, you know, released once a week. But even then, you can just wait until the series is finished airing and then just watch it all in one go. Whereas back then, imagine having to wait months to watch a TV show. It's just like an alien concept almost.
Making phone calls, just like writing letters, was how we communicated with people during the 1980s. This was before texting, FaceTime, and smartphones. There were 3 types of calls you could make. A local call, which you would make to friends. A long-distance expensive call, which you waited until after 7 p.m. to make because it was cheaper. And then the collect call, when you wanted the other party to pay for it. The collect call meant dialing the operator first to provide the phone number and your name. They would then call the other person and see if they would accept the charges before they would connect the call. Phone bills were a big part of the 1980s, and it was easy to rack up a huge bill if you weren't careful. Today, we don't even think about phone charges, except when we are adding new lines to our family plan.
Yeah, man. Like now, you can call it... There's just so many ways to call for free, like WhatsApp. All you need is an internet connection. You can make limitless phone calls.
One of the overarching,
even international, for free,
themes of the 1980s was saying no to drugs. The Just Say No campaign was spearheaded by First Lady Nancy Reagan and was promoted through public events, public service announcements, and even incorporated into TV programming like Different Strokes and Punky Brewster. There was also the DARE program, which had popular shirts that read DARE to keep kids off drugs. These programs targeted street drugs in the 1980s, but if they were relaunched today, they would most certainly be aimed at prescription drugs and the pharmaceutical companies that run non-stop ads on just about every platform.
Yeah, that's one thing about England and America that's different. Here, you cannot advertise just, like medication that you need a prescription for. Like, whereas in America, there was quite a lot of that. There's the only medications that you'll see adverts for will be things like, sanitary towels, like cough medicine, just basic stuff. And it's very, very few. You might see 1 or 2 of those per day.
Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to sign up for the Recollection Road newsletter using the link in the description. Recollection Road and Legacy Box both believe it's important.
Man, the 80s, it looked like such a cool decade. The fashion, the music, the movies, so many iconic movies from that era. The Goonies, E.T., some of the original Star Wars movies, I think. Very cool time to be alive. And yeah, this is why we need time travel. We need time travel to be invented so that you can just hop back for a day or two. I would love to go to a proper rave party in the 80s. It just looked like it would be so much fun. But yeah, the life of kids back then, so different compared to now. I mean, yes, a lot of the basic entertainment things are similar. There was games consoles, there were movies and stuff like that. But the way we consume them is just, it's like night and day. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.